So Kate and her husband Tobin were at our house.
Yeah.
How many days ago?
Maybe, well, it was 9 Airstream days ago.
So explain how you got here.
Very slowly. We left DC. We've been renovating.
The soundtrack to Saving Private Ryan.
I feel like I should be de-meddling right now. I'm just going to leave my decorative necklace. We bought a 1984 Airstream that looked like my childhood, and have been slowly stripping it down and building it back up Mennonite style, which is to say you only use family members for construction work. And and then we just kind of slowly drove all the way from DC here and didn't realize, for example, that the mountain pass is not for trailers. So
tried to warn
many
you.
a journey. It's been good.
Okay. But you made it. You look great. Everybody's happy.
Yeah, all intact.
Okay,
yes,
good.
thank you.
So let's do the background story.
Sure.
Just the last few decades of your life.
Yeah, it all began. The year was 1980. Sure. Well, I am Canadian. I'll just bring that in every 2 or 3 minutes, as all Canadians do. I really wanted to be a professor my whole life. My parents are academics and just nice little do-gooders. And I put myself on the academic super train, which is to say that every one of our bathrooms had a full bookshelf, which is completely unsanitary. But my life had this really direct momentum. All I wanted to do was to get the PhD, and then it was to get tenure, and then it was to be loved by the 200 members of my field. And just to do all the shiny, straightforward things that you think you want when you think you have endless amounts of time. So I spent my 20s just ruining most family vacations, becoming the expert in the American prosperity gospel, which is it's a subset of American Christianity that dominates most of 24-hour Christian programming, and the belief that God wants to reward any faithful person with health and wealth. So that was the thing I knew more than anything else, and wrote a book about it called Blessed, A History of the American Prosperity Gospel, which I only recommend my parents reading. And then I started getting weird pains in my stomach when I was about 35, and they thought maybe it was just my gallbladder. And so I started just going to test after test. And at one point it hurt so much that I used my healthy outdoor voice with the doctor and insisted that I get a scan. And then I just went back to work like I always do. And then out of the blue, one day in my office, I got a call from a physician's assistant to tell me that I had stage 4 cancer and that I would just have to go to the hospital right away. And that was kind of the end of this life I had pictured for myself that had one straight line that I thought was going to lead to something kind of special.
When Kay was at our house, I had to go get a box of tissues. I feel we're going to need it.
No, everything's fine. Everything's great.
So I want to get back to the prosperity gospel just to see how this all figures in. But first, I want to ask about the call. Why is it a medical technician or an assistant making that call?
I have found, I feel like the disclaimer is there's so many doctors that I love doctors. I have found the medical system to be a maze that I have really struggled to find care inside of. So usually I have gotten a very bizarre kind of patient treatment. So the person that tells me that I have cancer is somebody's tech assistant. And the person who tells me that I only have a 30% chance of living is the intern who comes in at 4 a.m. when I'm by myself. And all I could think of to say was oh man, you'd better be holding my hand if you're going to say something like that. And I think we were both practicing being human in a system that doesn't always know how to allow people their humanity.
My first Aspen panel this festival, which seems like 600 years ago, was a doctor telling me that the average treatment physician-patient contact is 8 minutes, and the patient gets to talk for 16 seconds before being interrupted. So
that sounds right.
So we're going to come in and out of your story, but
Sure.
Let's talk about the prosperity gospel and really its picture of human nature and how it aligns with the reality as you've experienced it.
Well, yeah, it was, I like puzzles, like hidden in plain sight kind of puzzles, which is why I like being a historian. And so I noticed that there was this subset of Christians who seemed to be saying what everybody else secretly believed, which is that they were entitled to health and wealth and longevity. And the people who preached it just tended to be one of the most despised religious subsets in American culture. So I was like, well, that's a fun distinction. So I went around creating a kind of elaborate spreadsheet of networking all the mega churches and then interviewing all these Christian televangelists to figure out how they became this enormous Christian conglomerate. And also they were most of the cheap paperbacks you find at Walmart. So how could they have flooded the culture with such a compelling message that every good thing will always be rewarded? So I looked at the different strands that comprise the religious movement, from something we call New Thought, which is a religious movement that says that your mind is the most powerful thing about you. Like your brain is a spiritual incubator that causes your words to create spiritual forces. So like just as God says, like, let there be light, and there is light, then so too people can speak positive things into reality. And all you have to do is say, go skiing in Aspen, like I did at Christmas, and tell a funny story about how you almost died going down the hill, and then try to return your skiing equipment, and you tell the funny story, and then the guy at the ski rental says, like, oh, don't bring those bad vibes in there. And I was like, oh, New Thought, thank you. I study this. So New Thought is really powerful in popular culture, combined with a certain form of Pentecostalism. And then the other strand is just American bootstraps.
So, I mean, we do, prosperity gospel or not, sort of have a belief that input leads to output, practice makes perfect.
Yes.
Good leads to good.
Yes, that's right.
How do you think about that right now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so deeply compelling, especially for those of us who are trying to find agency in our lives. A lot of people who've done incredible things did it with diminished circumstances, and they just found that little sweet spot that helped them get back up again. And I think that's one of the most powerful stories we can tell each other, where we help each other set our horizons. And that's, I think, a lot of what prosperity gospel does for people. It says, get back up. Tomorrow is going to be a better day. The best is yet to come. And it's a beautiful thing when you're not sure if maybe your best is behind you, or no one ever told you that you could believe in yourself. It's deeply compelling. The problem is that it's also inadvertently incredibly cruel for those who have a chronic illness, or they can't always be the one to live their best lives now because they're caring for somebody else. I mean, there's so many ways that our lives are defined by our loves for other people, aging parents, sick and disabled children. We're all bound up in other kinds of things that limit us in a culture that says that you are unlimited. And I think that can be really exhausting.
Now, how did this diagnosis change your perception of time?
Sorry, I'm laughing because it was really morbid for a bit. Yeah, I think, well, I don't know if it's just anyone in their 20s and early 30s, but you just keep putting into a system that you imagine is going to yield some kind of result. So, any kind of suffering means that later on you're going to be lying on a beach. And I can tell now that I'd paid in too much. Like I'd always ruined Christmas by just having one more article to write, or the vacation was like a vacation. It just meant I brought a laptop to a place that was not conducive with so much sand. So the second I got sick, I mean, at first we thought I got sick in September, and we thought I had till June. And that was a completely different way of thinking about seasons, because like everything was suddenly so much more beautiful than I'd ever realized. And that was maybe like bizarre to say, like the most unbelievably enriching thing about experiencing the limitations of time is everybody and everything became spectacularly beautiful to me. So, you're like poor, sad parents. You're like, oh, wait, you are charming. You're like, it's just like all this stuff. You're like, maybe I am annoying. So you kind of grow up into this different sense of what your life has meant to other people, and how grateful you are to have been loved, So that was intense. And I got used to a very short horizon. Like the second I got sick, I had 2-month scans, which meant I only had 59 days to live. And then they would do a scan, and then they would figure out if they were going to kick me off the drug that cost $16,000 per infusion to get. And almost immediately, I grew up lower middle class, like a lot of people, and I knew right away that this was going to bankrupt my family. So it was in this very tight, very limited sort of financial and temporal economy.
And describe where you are right now.
Oh, crushing it, just joking. So I get these different, I kind of define my life by scans. So I used to be on a 2-month scan, which was rough. And then I've graduated to 6-month scans, which is an unbelievable effort in immunotherapy. And for that, I am in awe of immunotherapy and clinical trials that work and doctors who put in more time than they had to. So yeah, that's been amazing. And that's been a kind of transition from like crisis to chronic. So instead of the high drama of it, I live in a sort of not fully, I don't have like the sunset horizon where I just imagine I can sprint forever. But I'm grateful to live inside something that has a lot of possibility there.
Yeah. Now, you've written about this a fair bit. You've spoken about this. You have a podcast. And yet I never get the sense it's become, that the emotions have settled down. But
Sure. Well, I guess that was kind of the big surprise, was that there was a before and there was an after in my life. And it took me a while to realize I'm not trying to get back to before. Like, I'm not trying to get back to that experience of invincibility. I'm not trying to get back to that sort of blaseness that I had, where I would go on a trip and I'd always assume that I would go there again. And there was a flatness with which I began to consume my life. And I was a series of small appetites, like never full. And part of it, the desire to talk about it or to have a kind of national conversation about what it means to not always be curable, is that I don't want to lose touch with what it feels like to recognize my own fragility and then to be able to be open to the fragility of the people around me.
now all of us are either before or after.
Yeah, yeah.
And from my perspective, you being after, you have a perspective and a wisdom that those of us who are still before don't have. Does it feel that way to you?
Only when I'm being uncharitable, or if it's like I'm watching a reality show and one incredibly attractive person looks to the other and says that everything happens for a reason, and there's only 12 people in that cast, so it probably wasn't super surprising that they ended up together. Like, I don't know. I think maybe it's more a correction of my own thinking. Like, I think I thought that everyone was as durable as I wanted to feel, that everybody was on this path to invincibility. And now I can just see that that's a complete fabrication. That I don't meet anybody that doesn't have something really intense that's taking a part of their lives apart. An aging parent, or a recent diagnosis of a friend, or a setback at work. I think we're all just a lot more fragile than I realized.
Now, when somebody has a diagnosis like yours, or a tragedy almost of any kind, those of us who are outside the circle don't know what to say. And I've also perceived those to whom the trauma is happening become very sensitive that other people say, that what other people say reflects the immensity of what they feel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So should we communicate into your life? What do I say next time I see you?
Me personally, yeah. This is a master class in me. Thank you. No, I get that. I think maybe one of the weirder parts is this thing that we're so good at, which is relating. Like, oh, I also love the color blue, is like actually the worst instinct when it comes to someone else's tragedy. Like, oh, this is also about me is not the right reaction. So it took me forever to realize that everybody's like, oh, my aunt had that, and she passed away. Like, why are the ants doing so poorly? It took me a while to realize, like, such a deep desire to build the bridge is also this thing that immediately made me feel like I was on the other side of glass. So, Yeah, deep relationality is hard to build, especially when someone seems so altered by their, I think that, I'm sure it happens to people in situations that are far more common, like losing a job or a divorce, any kind of major transition. There's like desire to approach and then the immediately desire to backpedal. Or the most, I always know when someone knows about me because they have like what I call Cocker Spaniel face, where their head immediately turns to the side and it's just like, no. And I'm like, no, stop pitying me. The struggle is to always feel like you were the person you were before, like more than one thing. So allowing people the acknowledgement, but without trying to explain it away it's a tricky relational business.
This is a slightly different case, but Anne and I had a friend whose daughter was killed in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, how do I talk to you?
Yes.
And and she said, some people sometimes say they shouldn't mention Anna because they'll remind me of something that's bad in my life, the loss of my daughter.
Yeah.
And she said, but they should know Anna is always on my mind. And if they mention it, it gives me the opportunity to come back or not.
Yeah.
And at least they've brought it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it all parallel? It's sort of a different case.
No, I'm sure that's true, though. The acknowledgement is such a big thing. Because I lost a lot of friends almost immediately. Just because it was, I think also in their defense, I was everybody's first try at tragedy. Like I was like,
right, so
they're in their 30s and like they're just getting started with a sad train. So I think in that way, people probably do age into more of a variety of human experiences. But yeah, I think there's such a desire to relate and also just to know, though, that person feels fundamentally different than the person they were before. And they're not always able to pretend as effectively as other people.
Anna's mom said that there were firemen and there were builders. The firemen came right away.
Yeah.
And the builders came weeks later but stuck around for a while.
That's nice.
And she said it was almost non-overlapping.
Oh, interesting.
And she also said that the people who showed up, some of her best friends did not show up.
Yeah.
But some people she didn't know at all showed up.
Yeah.
And so it was weirdly unpredictable. Did you think about whether to be a writer or be a public person about this?
No. I was just very angry. So I think partly why I started writing was I didn't realize how thick the cultural scripts around suffering are. And so, like when it comes to the people you love, not all of it is trying to be disingenuous. Like I wanted to be able to say, everything's going great. I'm sure there's going to be another. I'm sure we can afford it. Like you're saying all the things that you hope will eventually be true, and you're trying not to hurt the people that love you most, because you feel in that moment like you're the worst thing that ever happened to them. So you lie to each other, and then they say, "Oh, honey, it's going to be great," and then together you pat each other on the back and quietly go into your own rooms. So some of it is deeply loving. And then the rest of it is just that we live in this culture that seems unable to allow people to suffer without trying to explain them. So everywhere I went, and I'm like friends with, academia is too smart for its own good. And so I was surrounded by people who just wanted to just Google the hell out of my symptoms. So there was an endless desire to wonder what I ate or to ask about my family's genetic history. Of course, none of that is terribly useful often.
Very sensitive.
Yes. But like maybe if I explain it and I give you this information. So that was one common response. The other was the endless, but have you tried? In which they've just recently seen a documentary that they very much want you to understand the contents of. And a lot of it was, if you happen to know a third cousin who's into essential oils, that's also an excellent time to stop opening your mail. So all these kind of efforts to explain and then to help, but it also just creates the distance between the two of you, in which you used to be someone that didn't have to be explained.
Yeah. Now, you were not in the physics department or even the history department. You were in the divinity school, or are in the divinity school.
Yes.
So people of faith, or at least people who study faith, are supposed to have a larger
Sure.
transcendent language
I've
to
heard of
explain
this.
these
Yeah,
things.
totally.
Did that turn out to be true or not true?
Well, I'm sorry, I realized I didn't answer your very thoughtful question about why I started writing, which is kind of related. because I couldn't say things out loud, I started writing them down. Because I couldn't quite explain my own reaction. Like, why was I not... It's not that I was just sad. I realized that I felt outrage. Outrage that this would happen to me. And that maybe I was much more like the people that I had written about than I expected. And I didn't know how to express any of that because I wasn't totally sure what I would find. Also, I wasn't sure that I would be any good at writing anything that wasn't blessed a history of the American prosperity gospel. So I wrote because I was angry and I was sad and I was really lonely. And because I'm a historian, I didn't honestly expect very many people to read it. So that first attempt at writing an op-ed that said all of these secret feelings and then received the thousands of letters response, mostly from religious people, was a total shock. Also really dumb that I didn't think of not putting my email address at the bottom. They just added it with my tagline, and I was like, oh, I am now in conversation. So a lot of the people that were the cruelest were either fully religious or imagined themselves not to be religious at all. But that I should surrender to the fact that I'm the product of an uncaring universe, and why bother trying? Or that God was certainly punishing me for a reason, and wouldn't they, Joe from Albuquerque, like to help me figure out what that reason is? There was a real desire to defend God, I think, from tragedy. It's just such a basic desire to say that we need to be on God's side when we see the evils of the world. And if I explain you, then I've solved the God problem. And I thought it was unbelievably cruel that you can tell someone who's got a 2-year-old kid and a husband they've loved since they were 14 and say that their loss is somehow part of a divine math that they can solve. I just needed everyone to take a step back and realize the math isn't easy. Whatever the calculus of our lives are, it isn't easy. And it's certainly not probably obvious to a stranger. So then I just kept writing, mostly because I was bummed. And then I became really secretly thrilled to meet other people like me and realize that this cultural inability to talk about suffering is actually a really amazing way to enter into our deep humanity. So I just kind of stuck around for the conversation.
Now, I want to talk about suffering and who's good on suffering. But before we get there, the rage, did it have an object?
I was really mad at the medical industrial complex for a long time. Because I'd gotten very bad care for such a long time, which is partly what led to a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. I was really angry. And I didn't know how to get access to better care. Because I talk to journalists a lot, I give these historical lectures. I kept giving lectures to rooms, and someone would say, oh, my, insert name of famous person had this, and they immediately got care at so-and-so. And I realized that there was this magical side door that I didn't know how to get to, where people were getting different care. So that was a real struggle for me. I've spent a lot of the last 3 years just trying to get better care. So I was a little mad about that.
Yeah. Now let's get back to suffering, the light in the room.
Y'all ready for this? Then there's a balloon drop. Yeah.
We'll go to misery later. Who's good? Have there been books that the rest of us can read?
Who's good? Oh, man.
The Disney Corporation, maybe.
I did love. Man, who's good on suffering? I feel like everybody knows someone who's good on suffering that just shows up, doesn't ask for anything, and just knits in front of you while you're having your hard time. The ability to be just pure presence with people.
Yeah, I was being too academic. I was meaning a book. Have you read any books that have helped?
Didn't read. I'm terrible, but I read a lot. But the second I got sick, I was like, well, this isn't helpful. So I didn't find. Sometimes I love. Jan Richardson has this beautiful book on blessings for the brokenhearted. And sometimes I just find the language of blessing is so good because it's not a language of pragmatism. It's not trying to solve anything. It's just saying, in the midst of the intensity and the complication, and the absurdity of today. Like, here somehow is the gift for you. I love that kind of language, the language of in between. I love it. But everyone gave me a lot of books about other people dying, and I found it really depressing. So I made a lot of rules, like no sad talks after 8, only romantic comedies. Yeah, I was on a tight regimen.
Lifetime channel? No?
It was a lot of Hallmark Christmas movies, did a lot of good work for me.
Now, the key thing is that the math, as you said before, is super complicated.
Yeah.
But I would like to think there's still a math to it.
You would, wouldn't you, David Brooks?
Well, when you were at my house, you were at my house for a panel discussion, as one does in one's living room. And there was this great scientist whose name I've forgotten.
Christian Tomasetti.
It's about how often cells replicate. Correct me if I get this wrong.
No, let's do it. 2 humanities people. Let us explain this cancer theory. Let's do it.
But it's just how many replications there are.
Per organ.
And
Yeah.
it's mind-blowing how often the cells are replicating and replacing themselves. And you get that many replications just by sheer randomness, you're going to get some bad replications that are going to go in a bad direction.
Yeah.
So he's like introducing a fair bit of randomness into the whole equation of this world.
He made everyone very unhappy by introducing bad luck as a theory for cancer instead of just saying genetics and environment. There was just this third category, which just has to do with the fact that the body makes mistakes because it's prone to making mistakes. And we looked deeply into one another's eyes at your home. I loved everything he was saying. It was such an elegant way of describing the absurdity of why one healthy tissue is suddenly unhealthy, and there's no family story that explains it. But I think both of us landed on a certain distance, a gentle agnosticism about the ability to have predictive authority about what other people's lives will turn out.
But I think in his case, and I think in yours, not an agnosticism about the ultimate creator of the universe.
Yeah, we're for it. Yeah, we're into it. If you're into that kind of thing, I am. I think the gift there was, it's like a two-parter for me. One is, I needed to give up on the idea that there was this direct correlation between suffering and some other kind of reward. Because like the second you're hurting, all you want to know is that it's going to stop and maybe it's going to get better. And that's not always true. And so other people's desire to tell me that whatever awful thing would somehow have a commensurate good, you know it's not true. Like, you know, maybe it might be true for yourself. Like, you could learn a lesson or blah, blah, blah. But, like, you look at your husband and your kid and you think there's no version of this in which a kid growing up without his mom is as good as if I were there. And so every explanation, it just rings so, like, tinny in your ear that like, all the math goes away. But simultaneously, there is such a deep desire to find the beauty in the darkness. And just to say, like, if all of my theology could be summed up in anything, it would just be in the words, even so. Like, somewhere in there is this beautiful thing. And I have discovered this intense love that I couldn't have probably experienced otherwise. I just resent the desire to put on suffering people, one, the desire for them to teach the inspirational life lesson, and then to say, well, they learned it, so it must be worth it. I think the suffering person wants to say that it wasn't always worth it. Yeah.
Now, a friend of ours, I don't know if you know Christian Wyman.
Yeah.
So he's a beautiful, I think I connected you once a little while ago. He's a beautiful poet and a Christian. And for him, faith is a bit like, it's a bit like poetic inspiration.
Yeah.
It comes out of mystery and then suddenly vanishes. I'll tell a 1-minute story about Chris. I love telling this story.
No, let's do it.
So he was in Prague with his girlfriend, and a falcon came and landed on the window when he was writing in the kitchen. And he looked at the window and saw this incredible, beautiful bird.
Yeah.
And he called to his girlfriend, "Come here, you got to see this." She came out of the shower, dripping wet, and they stared at the bird, and the bird turned its eyes and locked its eyes on Wyman's. And he said, I felt like I was peering into centuries when I looked into the bird's eyes. Just he felt his insides crumble, and he was peering into some infinite depth.
Yeah.
And his girlfriend, understanding the moment, said, make a wish. And so he wrote a poem about this, and it includes the stanza, and I wished, and I wished, and I wished, and I wished that the moment would not end.
Yeah.
And just like that, it vanished.
Yeah.
And so for him, faith is the coming and the going.
Yeah.
And faith is not being in a transcendent moment, but using those interruption of life, taking that account into the rest of your life.
Yeah, because that has been the huge bummer of continuing to live, which sounds so weird. But like it felt so beautiful and so like I knew every good thing to love. Like it ordered everything, just like magic. And then you keep living, and there's a weird, I don't mean to sound depressing, but like there's the weird poison of living sometimes. Like where you feel like it's just sinking into you and you start loving the wrong things again. And suddenly you're super petty about somebody else's book about a similar topic. Like you're just being a total dink. But you had a minute there where you knew what was beautiful. And I love the idea that it is a kind of mystery that reorients other kinds of loves. But then you have to like put your boots on and keep walking.
And I just want to underline that even so. Because sometimes people think being a believer or not believer is like being a Republican or a Democrat. Like you just choose which has the best policies. Like, but it's a weirdness. Muslims, there's a Muslim saying, "Whatever you think God is, He's not that." And so I want to keep that mystery. Just about higher and lower loves. You're coming out with another book.
My academic. Do we care about that? My academic book for two people? Do we care about that?
We
don't have to care about that.
But we care about your attitudes towards it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
But we intensely care about the book itself.
We can't care about my academic. Well, that was like a weird existential choice I had to make when I started treatment, and then you just don't know how long you're going to be in it, how long it lasts, or when you crest and it's downhill. And then it became this really intense questioning of like, well, then how do I spend my time? Like, how do you figure out what to love if your time is really limited? And shouldn't I just quit my job and spend time with my family and force them to look deeply into my eyes 24 hours a day? Maybe they wouldn't like that. And I decided maybe part of living, whatever that means, is to figure out what your best gift is and then keep giving it. And hilariously, the only thing I am good at is writing incredibly dense histories of contemporary religious movements. So I was like, all right, that's it. I'm going to try to get tenure at my university by writing my book for 12 people. And so I launched a study of women in the public religious sphere called The Preacher's Wife. But I was so sick when I was doing most of the research. So for some of the interviews, I asked these beautiful, glamorous, religious celebrity ladies to come on down to the Winship Cancer Center and sit across from me. I took out my clipboard with my infusions in. I was like, thank you so much for coming to my office today. And these beautiful people were willing to kind of open up their lives. And I feel such a sense of joy to be able to see it published in October because it was an act of hope. And every now and then you get to see a dream come true. So I'm into it.
Do you think you care about it as much as the first? Well, two things like I wrote a book about not caring about material things and career success, and I check my damn Amazon score every 5 minutes. So complete hypocrite.
Totally. Oh, that's so funny. I love the absurdity of it too. Yeah, I mean, hilariously, I think that's partly why I started the podcast, because it bugged me that a book would make it seem like it was special for someone to have cancer and then to talk about their tragedy. Because what I thought was more interesting was the fact that it was such an exoticism for someone to be suffering at a young age. And I thought, like, maybe we all need to get over that, and maybe I can get over that if I just surround myself with more people. It made me slightly less petty, I hope. We'll see. Time will tell.
You can write dense academic prose, but you've also written a beautiful book in very common prose.
Thanks.
Was that, a lot of people can't do that. Like, my father was an academic and he wanted to write a popular book and just couldn't get the academic prose out of his mind. And so that's one question just about your writing style and process. And second, about, you had written this quite impactful book for the common reader. you didn't do another of those, at least not yet, but you did the academic book.
Yeah, I really wanted to keep my job. I figured if I kept living, I'd want that job. So that was a partly pragmatic choice. My most honest answer to writing anything that wasn't what I was trained to write is that when I got sick, I lost my pride. I just figured if I sucked, like, who needed to read it? And that freed me up. And weirdly, this whole thing has, like, I feel like more than I was before. And I don't want that to seem like I'm a hypocrite, that, like, suffering people gain a blah, blah, blah. But I do think it allowed me to have more of a freedom to be more honest. And that allowed me, I think, a greater ability to access some of the things I wouldn't have said otherwise.
One more concept, and then we'll go to the floor. And that concept is hope.
Yeah.
We're
for it, aren't we?
We're for it, yes. We like.
Yes.
But beyond the Barack Obama 2008 campaign, what have you learned about hope?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about hope from your book in the last couple of weeks. I've been reading it in my Airstream. And
car sickness.
No.
It's car sickness, it's not the book.
It did feel transcendent. Yeah, I think we both agree that, like, it's a language of vocation, right? That there is a moreness that has to do with transcending the particularity of our absurdity, our mistakes, and our good gifts, I think. And that it makes you want to pour into other people's stories maybe more than we might have invested in before. Does that sound right?
Sounds profound. Now, let's have some questions. And given the sensitivity of the subject, I just asked that all the questions be about Pete Buttigieg's debate performance, and they be directed at me. Let's go right here, the gentleman in the purple sweater.
I can't believe
There's a microphone coming.
I absolutely can't believe this experience. I thought I was coming to hear something about religion. I didn't want to come, but after I have stage 4 cancer.
Oh, hey.
I'm 85 years old.
Yeah.
The only difference between your experience and mine is that I'm at the stage of life where I'm thinking about all the things I did for 85 years and all the things I shouldn't have done, right? It's a time for reflection.
Yeah.
But you were young when this happened to you. But exactly the same experience. I was angry. Yeah. I was angry at the doctors who had a right to say to this, out of the blue, you got stage 4. I went to my regular doctor and I said, why didn't you tell me this? He says, because I don't want to tell you those kind of things. Those things have scary things, and you may live 2 years or 5 years. Meantime, it's been 10 years. I should have been dead 4 years ago, right? Every experience you articulated tonight, every one I've had, anger. I'm insisting that when I die, I'm going to take some money, if I possibly can, I'm going to give it to the university that's taking care of me. They can't have a degree until they spend some time learning how to take care of patients intellectually. 2 minutes, what did you tell? 4 seconds? This particular brilliant person who's taking care of me, if I see her every 3 months for 10 minutes, it's a blessing, right? I should have more time. There should be some conversation about the inner self, all of the things you've been talking about. Yeah. So it's wonderful to be here.
Thank you, sir.
One more question, and I really should sit down, but
You're doing fine. You're doing fine.
I read a lot now. Obviously, I'm 85. I can play some golf, but that's all I can do. And read.
I love you.
Microphone a little closer.
Today, I'm reading a book by a very famous historian, McCullough. And he's writing a book. This particular book is about the religious people in New England who came to start the Ohio movement out west. And they were religious and they were good, hardworking people, and it was very exciting. And there was one paragraph that one of these religious people wrote back to his friends that I have to read to you, because I'm sending it to my friend who's living through this, but it fits exactly. I mean, it's unbelievable. What do you do now with this kind of a thing? So this particular very lovely, he was a priest, wrote back to his friends, count the day lost at which the setting sun sees at its close no worthy action done. Is that wonderful?
Worthy action.
So at least I can think about the good things and the bad, and a good, worthy action, if all of us did, would be helpful in this whole experience.
Yeah, bless you. Thank you for that.
Comments?
I just love it. I think it presses us into a deep desire for worthy action. I think that's exactly right. We want to make the beautiful things matter. I think that's exactly the right impulse. So bless you.
Okay, there's a young lady over there.
Hi, Kate. First of all, I love you. I love your work. I met you last year. I'm a little bit obsessed with you. But you talk about how you used to be shiny, right? That sort of feeling. And I think as someone in my 20s, that's definitely a thing. And we've talked about this. I have chronic illness and that sort of thing. But I think I really admire the way that you reconcile that strength of who you are and that shiny person that you saw with the physical weakness that comes with living with this kind of suffering. How do you do it?
Such a nice. Oh, well, hey, thank you. That's very sweet. You're very kind. I think it's hard when our ambitions are usually just a quarter turn away from our gifts. You know, it's never the opposite. It's just a little, I mean, that's in religious terms, that's what we always call idolatry. It's a good thing loved incorrectly. And it's hard to like suss out our good things. I struggle a lot with that because I'm never quite sure if the good thing is just a reflection of my desire to do something. You know, you just go with all the like pragmatic instrumentalist language. I find that my best loves are sorted out by being around people who are lovelier than I am, and in looking at my son. He does not care at all if I bought this lovely jumpsuit and wore my decorative hair. I mean, I used to never get to do anything like this, so this is really special for me. And I think as long as I can see that this is an incredible gift of grace, then I probably won't become the monster that I worry that I might become otherwise.
You've used the phrase best loves a few times.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just like kind of into it. That's how I like order it.
Yeah, it's an Augustinian
concept. Yes.
So
yes, we're also for that. Yeah. Here, no, you do it. You, Augustine is the, go ahead, do it.
I'm not doing it. We're going to go to the floor. We'll drop Augustine.
We can talk about Augustine.
Any other questions? I see one in the far end over there. I thought it would be good to have a lecture in ancient theology.
It all began in the 4th century. Let's do it.
Good evening. In my beautiful language of Dakota, Chante washte anape chuzapi. I greet you with a warm heart and a handshake. It's been a hard year for me. My name is Belinda Faye Joe Rencounter Hemiye. I come from the land of the Dakota Hunkpati Amataha, a little reservation right in the middle of South Dakota near the Missouri River. And my people, as most of us know, have been through so much. And I still hear comments, not from anybody here, that, oh, your people need to get over it.
Could you bring your wisdom to the subject here?
So, up here?
No, I mean just to the subject of our conversation.
Okay, so I'd like to share with you that our people have spirituality in the purest form. Ask any of our children at home. Okay, they see the spirituality in its purest form. We don't have to pay for it. You know, they see our Creator. And they are the innocent ones. And they are the ones that tell the truth. So my auntie said, if you get invited somewhere, you make sure you get up and share something. So that's why I'm sharing tonight, that our people are really resilient. And we have a way of life called Wodakota, a way of life, not a religion, not, not church. It's a way of life, Wodakota. So I come from a beautiful homeland, and I come from a land of spirituality, of mystery, of beauty, of love. And I see that in our speaker up here. She has that all in her. And I want to compliment you and thank you for sharing your words tonight with us. I'm a teacher, so I will share some of what I learned out here with my students. So I want to thank all of you for listening to me, and I wanted my friend to say something here, but she doesn't want to, so it's okay. It's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
coming.
Right here in the front, gentleman in the green shirts. I like to make my mic runners run.
Hi. This might be a personal question, but I feel like we've already crossed that Rubicon. Are you willing to share your current religious beliefs, and did they change throughout your experience?
Sure, yeah. Well, so I teach in a divinity school, so most of my job is looking at the anxieties of young Methodist pastors and saying, it might be okay, I don't know. I grew up Mennonite, so it's quite a simple, lovely, unornamented kind of faith, but pretty basic. I did wonder if there would be, like if you look at most Christian movies, like the big plot line will be that the professor went to the university and was confronted by book learning and then rejected it for a simpler faith. And the truth is, when I was really struggling, most of the deep resources I found by just wandering the hallways and asking poor, unsuspecting pastors and nuns for prayer or for counsel. And so my school, Duke Divinity School, ended up being the place where I had most of my hardest spiritual questions, like not to be narcissistic, but why is this happening to me? and found a richer language that was beyond deserve and fairness. I don't use the word fair anymore. And so I kind of dug I don't think I dug the deeper well. I feel like other people sort of excavated it for me that I was surrounded by, but I think that's mostly just because I work in a place of kind of deeply holy people. I'm a historian, so I feel like I wasn't really ready for any of it. But in the end, I think I found something richer. It wasn't quite so much of a crisis as it was a sort of a deepening.
How do you feel the experience of other people's prayer for you?
Oh, yeah, that can be very intense. Well, so I studied faith healers. I went to Israel with Benny Hinn, the controversial televangelist. Those are the kinds of people I'm used to interviewing. So I've seen a lot of very dramatic expressions of like prayer at you, prayer whether you like it or not. Prayer is a test of your faith. And I really see, I believe in the power of prayer, but I mean that in a very broad way. I think that healing can look like a restored sense of peace, a deepening sense of God's love for us. Sometimes it can mean a healed body, but I try not to be a little bossy about it. So, you know.
Right here on the aisle.
Hi, I just have a question about how you were Mennonite, so how your parents, how they handled it, and how they feel now that you're like in, now in remission, I guess, sort of.
Yeah. I know, totally. The word for immunotherapy and remission is always like remission. It's like, we're not sure what's happening. Yeah, though I did appreciate that you did this with your hands. It's totally like, I'm doing fine. It's exactly right. Like, it's exactly right. I think it really brought, both my parents and my husband's parents are pretty faithful people. And so I think the most important support systems for them became their churches. They were just terrified. And I think a parent's love for a kid is it's just so much more than, I don't think I could have known how hard it would be for them to be helpless. And to also feel like they'd finally launched their kid and now she's just like catapulting off a cliff was like unexpected. So I think they're much more densely connected with their faith communities than they were before. I think because we all felt a little helpless. And then we realized like in the middle of it, most of what we need is just each other. So that's kind of where we landed.
Hi.
Hey.
So we have talked a lot about, and I don't mean this in like a in a bad way, but like sort of individual suffering. And I was just wondering if that made you think about like other types of suffering or connected you to that. I just, hearing you talk about like the medical industrial complex, like, did you think a lot about that, or did you find yourself looking at other children and being like, in a different way, being like, I hope they have what my kid will have, or the things that I want for my child, and feeling that in a different way?
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like you feel like you kind of get tapped into this substream where everybody else, like I can't sit in the blood, like you know what you said just gave me shivers, because like I can't sit in the blood work room without looking at everybody else and all their kids and wanting every good and beautiful thing. And that's partly, I think, why I started the podcast, is I wanted more language, especially to talk about corporate suffering and suffering that, it's almost like, I mean, pain really is the sort of, it's this crystalline thing where everybody's pain is so different, and yet it's corporate. And we share one another's. And our pain is so particular to our gender and our race and our community, and like all that stuff binds us into stories or excludes us from being considered worthy of other people's care. So I'm really kind of invested in like the way we account for one another's suffering and the way we feel indebted to solve one another's problems. I think I might have been more of a hearty individualist before this. Yeah.
Let's go, Chip. I think there's a mic. We'll go to Chip next. Go ahead.
I thank you so much for your comments. I'm over here. Way
Oh,
over
hey,
here.
hi. Sorry, you're like right under the light. So, where is this mysterious voice?
Oh, great. I get to be God for a
You
day.
could totally do it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So you talked about this next book being an act of hope for you, and congratulations. What's your next act of hope?
That's such a nice, intense, important question. I really like, I think it just like, it opened up this thing for me where I've been thinking a lot about precarity. Like, so Dorothy Day, this Catholic social justice worker in the 30s, had this lovely word, right, precarity, to think about. She lived in tenement housings in the slums, and then she thought about poverty, not just as something that people had to get over, but it was an experience of fragility that wasn't always transient. Like, it wasn't always going to be something that people would get over. And so I love thinking about how fragile we are, and the way that that actually calls us into greater community and interdependence. So I've been thinking more about that sort of like chronic in a fix-it world kind of thing, and I think that's where my sort of vocation is moving.
Let's go to the front row here.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm wondering what sort of spiritual practices, or maybe not spiritual practices, sustain you now, that are sort of go-to things, particularly when times are rough?
My number one go-to, which will be an Aspen go-to, is just to be outside. Almost immediately I found, like, the more things were terrible news, the more I just felt reconstituted by like sunlight and listening to the birds. And so being outside has been like one of my big go-tos. The other is just sustaining prayer. Just other people just putting their hands on me and being able to be with me. That makes me feel like, you know when someone knows something about you and you kind of forgot it, and when you look at them, like you feel it sort of reflected back to you? That's what that is for me. And I feel it too when I'm just able to see other people do beautiful projects, the way they reflect the humanity of others to them. That feels like a kind of superpower that I'm watching. That makes me feel like any pain I'm going through is also just part of a bigger human experience, and that maybe the biggest thing is to get over the shame of being fragile in the first place.
Is there a stage 4 sisterhood or brotherhood? Is there?
Oh man, colon cancer is not usually for my demographic, so I didn't find a rich community there. But I am, I'm surrounded by a lot of like faith projects, and so it does sort of help me watching other people serve. It makes me feel, like pain makes you feel like a bit of a narcissist. Like, this is the only pain that's ever been. So watching it helps me kind of get outside of myself again.
Let's take one more right over there.
Kate, I have such a huge heart for you. I just thank you.
Thanks.
And I'm Jovian, by the way. Pleasure.
Hi.
You've experienced life in a way that some of us will, some of us will not, right? It's all different. But there's been a invitation, I think, I've experienced in my own sickness, that you're invited into when you can see life differently, when you come so close to recognizing it won't always be.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder, in this vein of hope, what do you hope for us?
Yeah.
That now that you've seen things a little bit differently, what do you hope we do differently, we think, and perhaps we feel?
Oh. I wish there were more language for us. I wish there were less shame when we suffer. I wish there were more spaces in our culture to allow suffering to be unexplained and certainly not weaponized against us. I wish there were spaces where we could abandon the meritocracy for a minute and recognize each other's humanity. And I think the more I find like little bits of language that other people give me, the more I think like there's room for all of us in there. I'm just sad that it took like this experience for me to see that in other people. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Okay, I usually try to sum these things up with a quip or an observation, but I have nothing to say. Kate, well done.